Good afternoon and welcome on behalf of the Junior League of Greensboro and synerG, and welcome to all of those out there watching us on the live feed. My name is Carly Swain. I'm the Community Vice President of the Junior League of Greensboro, and I'm also a synerG member. synerG, under the umbrella of Action Greensboro, is an active organization of young adults who lead initiatives with the mission to attract, engage, and connect young professionals to Greensboro. synerG values the creation of opportunities and atmospheres that promote connectedness, diversity, inclusiveness, and accessibility. The Junior League has been women building better communities for over 86 years in this community. We have always had a public stand focusing on families, children, volunteerism, and education. About 2 years ago, we voted as a membership to restructure our community impact model to be issue-based. The issue we voted on was education, specifically Title I elementary schools, partnering with Cone Elementary, one of the lowest performing schools in Guilford County at the time. We allocated $64,000, 13 programs, and 105 volunteers in year one. In year two, which we're in now, we allocated $70,000, 15 programs, and 115 volunteers. We are 30 days into the school year, and Chris Weichert, the principal at Cone Elementary, stated it's the best month they've ever had. Our focus areas are literacy, learning, basic needs and wellness, teacher support, parent involvement. Junior League is committed to supporting programs that enhance our public education system. We are committed to and invested in Cone Elementary, and we vow to keep our members and the general public educated about all public affairs. We are excited to be partnering with synerG today to host the quarter-cent sales tax referendum discussion. I would like to take a moment to introduce Luke Bierman, Dean of Elon University School of Law. Luke.
Thank you. I couldn't be happier to welcome you all here to the law school. We at Elon Law really do view ourselves as an important component in the community, as an important hub for these kinds of conversations, and certainly when we're talking about the future of North Carolina, the future of Greensboro, indeed the future of the country, the idea of supporting public education resonates very closely to us, as we are a young law school, but a law school with a great deal of ambition and a great deal of focus on the future. So with that, thank you very much for being here. We're happy to host you. We hope you have a good experience and a good discussion, and we appreciate you taking some time out of your day for this important issue. Thanks. Are you introducing?
You can.
No?
Thank you, Dean Bierman, and thank Elon Law for hosting us today. I would now like to welcome the Chairman of Guilford County School Board of Education, Mr. Alan Duncan, for some special remarks.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Thank you for sponsoring this Junior League, and Dean Bierman, thank you for making this great facility available for this meeting. We really appreciate all that Elon Law School means for our community, and we certainly appreciate all that the Junior League means for our community. So thank you for that. As some of you may have heard or noticed, the question of whether or not there's adequate resources for public schools in North Carolina has become a bit of an issue. It's really been a bit of an issue for a while. We're just getting inundated with television ads about it now that make it, whether we want to know about it or not, we're sort of flooded with it. So a lot of people ask, what are the truth of the issues? And there's a lot of campaign advertising, and I think it's been genuinely confusing to a lot of people. So I think the way to look at this is the one true measure in terms of where we are with funding for our schools is what are the average resources? What is the average amount of funds going per pupil in our state? And since 2008, that number has declined, and it's declined by a good amount. And when you multiply that by 1.5 million students, that good amount becomes a huge amount very quickly. So in terms of our per student allotments of resources, they have declined in a significant way. That's been impacted further by charter schools and the amount of money that goes to charter schools versus the amount of money that goes to public schools. In addition to that, if you look at in the county, our average student per allotment has gone down since the year 2008 till today. Now, our county commissioners obviously who make those decisions have been confronted with a lot of difficult decisions since 2008 in terms of balancing a budget in a very difficult economic time period, certainly for our county as well as for the nation. So the county commissioners have not been able to make up any differences that have been created by the funding at the state legislature level. In fact, there's been some declines there. We've had very good conversations. It's often frequently a thing that's enjoyed to try to say that the Board of Education is at odds with the county commissioners and there's some controversy going on. Well, the system's set up for us to have a tension point. The county commissioners makes the ultimate decision in a county for how the funds are going to be allocated, and they have a number of different areas they have to select. We have an obligation to advocate to the county commissioners for what our needs are for our students. And so it's unlikely we're ever going to agree. We're going to walk in together and say, you've got that just right, that both sides would see it exactly right. So there's inherently built into tension into the system an appropriate kind of tension with respect to what the dollars are. The county commissioners have not given us near as much as we've asked for, particularly in the last couple of years. On the other hand, I think the county commissioners say we're trying the very best we can under difficult circumstances. That background leads us to where we are. There's no question that we have tremendous resources needs. When North Carolina, as of last year, was ranked 49th in the country in terms of per pupil funding, I think that tells us what we need to know. We don't need to be number one. We don't need to be even close to number one. But we don't need to be close to 50 either. And so there's a moderate and an appropriate place that we can get. The quarter-cent sales tax emerged out of discussions that our board had with the county commissioners about how we can get to a place of better or adequate funding. County commissioners were very sensitive about not raising property taxes further because we're still in a difficult recession period, and they feel that works hardship on some of our citizens because property taxes have traditionally borne the bulk of the resources generated for our county. So out of that discussion, there was a provision passed several years by the legislature that a quarter-cent sales tax could be put on the ballot and could be used for appropriate uses. It actually, historically, and this has been totally lost in the wash, involved in fact certain funding that used to come to the Board of Education from the state was going away. And this was a way that the local community could decide to replace that. The way it's worded on the ballot, you will not know that history because it's not reflected in the wording on the ballot. It will simply say, do you vote for a quarter-cent sales tax? In fact, the quarter-cent sales tax, in this instance, our county commissioners have said, and they're not bound by this in future commissions to cut that question off right at the pass, other than good faith on the part of our county commissioners and the fact that we as citizens will hold them accountable for the fact that we're very much moving for this to support education. But they passed, and in the motion made it clear it was for public education by a 7-2 vote, the ability to put this referendum on the ballot. And we are very grateful for the fact that our county commissioners did that because this gives our citizens a chance to decide what's the right thing. And I think it's always a good thing if your citizens get a chance to decide. I just came back from Scotland, and their citizens, with a 90% turnout of the vote, got to decide whether to break away from the UK or not. And so citizens making those kinds of decisions and with that kind of participation and thought process is a great thing. And we want to foster the kind of education so we have a great thought process here in our county for this. And so with that backdrop, I would say to you from our standpoint, this is an extremely important issue. Our students need the resources, our teachers need the resources, and our facilities need the resources. And so for us, it's an important issue, and it's important that people get all the facts so that you can consider how you think you should vote on this measure. And we think it's an important measure for you to consider, and we want everyone to be as well educated as possible. So thank you for taking your valuable time today and spending it on this.
Thank you, Chairman Duncan. Now I'd like to introduce our panelists today. To my right here is Maurice Mogreen, Guilford County School Superintendent. Thank you for being here. To my left is Winston McGregor, Executive Director of Guilford Education Alliance. And over here beside Mo is Jennifer Fountain, a GCS parent and local attorney. And over here beside Winston is Patrice Faison, Principal at Page High School. The panelists will be answering questions that have been pre-selected for 50 minutes. Upon that time, we will stop and we will take questions from the audience. I will begin the first question to Mr. Green. On November 4th, Guilford County voters will be asked to consider a quarter-cent increase in county sales tax. Why is more money needed to support Guilford County schools? And if approved, how would the revenue generated be used?
Thank you, and good afternoon to everyone. Let me say thank you to synerG and the Junior League of Greensboro for hosting this panel discussion. I believe that it's extremely important that our community be made well aware of the issues impacting our school district, and certainly as the community decides what to do with this particular question, the more information we can get out there, the better off we will all do. Before I directly answer the question, I think it's important to put a little bit of context around it so we know what we're talking about. Guilford County Schools proudly serve 72,000 students. They're wonderful, intelligent, gifted children. They're quite diverse. We have a very, very diverse school district, with about 41% of our student body now being African American, 35% being white Caucasian, 13.5% being Latino, Hispanic, Asian, who make up almost 6%. We're diverse in the sense of almost 60% of our student body now is eligible for free and reduced lunch, which is a measure of poverty. We have almost 100 languages spoken among our student body. We have about 13,000 of our students that would be classified as advanced learners, about 10,000 of our students that would be special education students that receive those types of services. So we're a very diverse school district. The other piece of background information I think is important is to talk about sort of where we've been over the course of these last 6 years, because we'll refer back to 08, 09 a number of times as we're sort of discussing this issue. Certainly our school district has been focused since 2008 on three major things, certainly being excellent in all that we do, academic excellence, and then character development and service learning. We have made, I believe, remarkable progress in a number of areas, having the highest graduation rate, four-year cohort graduation rate, at 88.5% of our students graduating at the time. Having more and more of our students take and pass advanced placement courses and being able to get them college credit, if you will, for doing well on those examinations. If you compare ourselves on both of those measures to the state and the nation, we would be above the state and the nation in both. Being identified as a national district of character and having individual schools now being recognized as national schools of character certainly suggests that we're doing great work there as well. With that background, we have to then face reality. There's a lot of work yet to be done, needs to be done for so many of our young people in order for them to be successful in our school district. With new measures of accountability coming out, we have many, many students who are not performing on grade level, if you will. And so there's a lot of work that needs to be done to elevate those students. There's also a lot of work that needs to be done even with students who would be considered advanced to really be able to push them further, faster, and be able to provide them the opportunities that they need to be successful. With that context, then, resources becomes critically important to the conversation. Because at this point, then, we must figure out how do you marry up, where I would say strong desire and, in fact, strategies that we know will work within students who need those that desire and strategies in place for them to be successful. The missing link, then, will be resources. And unfortunately, if you look back from 2008-09, to now, we have been in a situation where there have been dwindling resources, both at the state level and at the local level. And let me just peel that back a little bit further. Using data from the Department of Public Instruction for North Carolina. In 2008, the state was giving somewhere around $5,800 per student. In 13-14, that number went down to $5,452 per student. That turns out to be several $100s per student. And you might say, well, that's really not a whole lot, but when you times that across the state, 1.5 million students in our state, that becomes real money. And then you multiply that over a number of years, and you can really see the significant impact that will have on schools. On a local level, the same thing is true, unfortunately, where we've had, in 2009, for example, about $2,420 per student, that number going down to $2,332 per student in the 13-14 year. Again, you might say that's not a lot of money on an individual basis. But you've got to remember then that 72,000 of our students, plus a few thousand charter school students have received that funding as well. And that becomes real money. You multiply that then over the number of years that we've been experiencing this sort of downward spiral, and that becomes significant resources that unfortunately are impacting our schools. There certainly we've made reductions in central office. Absolutely we have. But we've also unfortunately have made significant reductions in our schoolhouses as well. We've eliminated over 400 positions district-wide. Over 200, almost 200 of those would be classroom or teacher level positions. So we've had to raise class sizes over the course of the last several years a few times. We've even had to do away with things that we know make a difference. Lowering class size even further in some of our more challenged schools. We've had to eliminate some of that opportunity. I talked early on about the graduation rate for the school district and the great work that's being done there. One of the things, unfortunately, we have to do for the 14-15 year is eliminate graduation. One of the very things that we know makes a difference in allowing our kids to get to the finish line, if you will. We have to say we're reaching sort of to the point where we can't, at least at a district level, supply those resources to each and every one of our high schools, traditional high schools, where we know that it will make a substantial difference. So we're at a point where I believe that the resources are definitely needed. That's on the operating side. On the repair and maintenance side, when I arrived, we were receiving, before I arrived in 04-05, $11.5 million a year from the county commission for repairs and maintenance, capital outlay funds. That went almost exclusively for repair and maintenance of facilities. That number went down to $7 million when I arrived. And unfortunately, we've been on a downward spiral even on that regard. We're down this past year, 13-14, down to $2 million. It's spread across a growing amount of footage that we must take care of. In fact, we're up to over 12 million square feet of facilities that we must take care of for last year, $2 million. And so that becomes a difficult thing for us to do. Now, the county commission provided slight increases on operating and a slight increase on repair and maintenance for this coming year. Unfortunately, not sufficient enough to even begin to get us back to where we were in 08, the 08 school year. So, I believe the need is there. I would submit to you then that it's important to figure out where we will put those resources. The Board of Education was very clear as to where we put these resources in two primary areas. The first being that would be in classrooms with teachers, things like lowering class size, teacher compensation, teacher assistance, instructional supplies and materials, instructional technology. And then the other major area being repairs and maintenance. Certainly, in both instances, there's significant need, and the Board of Education has recognized that the need can begin to be addressed with these additional dollars. Won't solve all the needs for our district, but we'll begin to make a difference. We'll begin to see that downward spiral, if you will, go in the opposite direction.
Thank you. Next question is to you, Winston. What is the core spent sales tax? And why is increasing the sales tax preferable to increasing property tax?
I think Alan touched on this, but the basics that they're worth repeating a little bit, because you all are influencers, you all are folks who will have conversations at the water cooler with neighbors and with friends, that you have ways to talk about this and understand it, is we're increasing our sales tax from 6 3/4 cents per dollar to 7 cents per dollar. 1/4 penny on every dollar. This increase, I think, sales tax, for example, is a combination of state levy tax and county tax. So our overall sales tax is actually lower today than it was about a year ago because the state lowered their portion. So where we were paying close to 7 3/4 cents per dollar, we're now paying 6 3/4. And we're trying to get back 1/4 cent of that to fund public schools. So our overall tax burden, even with this increase, will be lower than it was a year ago. That's an important piece of information here to understand. I think the basics of why this is preferable to property taxes, I think the primary answer is this is a broadly agreed upon good solution. We have a good working relationship between our county commissioners and our school board. We don't have the kind of divisive dynamics that are going on in places like Wake County and in other communities. And so much of that has to do with the leadership, I think, that Mel and Alan have provided at the school district and their willingness to really sit down and understand the challenges that the county commissioners are facing across the board and to talk really honestly and with transparency about the school system. And post-recession really made a decision at the school system level that they understood resources were scarce, everyone was operating in difficult economic times, and it was time for the school system to roll up its sleeves and figure out how to do everything that it could, no excuses with standards, even when there was less money available. With the understanding that as the economy began to turn, we had to come to the table in good faith and know that that couldn't be a forever place. We couldn't stay at this relatively stagnant or with very small increases. And so in the conversations over the last year between the school board leadership and leaders at the county, they looked at what the options were. What are the palatable options? What are the practical options? What are the political barriers to this? And agreed that the sales tax was better than the property tax. 40% of sales tax is borne by visitors to our community. So that means 40% of this revenue isn't coming from local residents, so it's not putting that burden on local residents. The necessities of unprepared food, prescription medicine, and gasoline are exempted from this. And I think really most importantly that this could broadly be supported by our community and not be an us versus them issue, which we don't need the community. So we have broad support from the business community, from community-based organizations, from parents, vast majority of the county commissioners, as well as unanimous of the school board, and that this is winnable and it's doable. So I hope that you all will do everything you can to understand the details of those, to be able to respond in conversations and questions about this. I think that's sort of a straightforward answer to that.
Thank you, Liz. Jennifer, what assurance do voters have that the additional revenue will be used for public schools? Can't county commissioners spend it however they like?
I think I must have drawn a short straw because I think this is one of the harder questions to answer. Because there is no guarantees in life except death and taxes, of course. The county commissioners can choose every year how they spend their money. We pay our property taxes. We don't get to determine how that money is used. We pay it. Now there's an expectation that they're going to provide us police service, that they're going to provide us fire service, just as there's an expectation that they're going to fund our schools. So you have that expectation, and Alan and Winston have talked. You've got voter accountability. They've gone on record, the county commissioners, the majority have said, yes, we believe that there is a need to better fund our schools. We believe that the sales tax is the best way to do it. There are other counties, like Winston said, in Wake, the commissioners refuse to put it on the ballot. So you've got the county commissioners buy-in there. They're willing to put it on the ballot and let the public decide. You also have, although Alan talked about slight tension, and there's natural because of the advocacy position of the Board of Education, but you also have a great partnership between the county commissioners and the Board of Education. And that was shown when the state cut funding, and most counties were in fact cutting funding to education. Guilford County was at least able to hold steady and sometimes provide small increases. So these county commissioners do understand the need to fund our schools, not only to adequately and better educate our students, but also over the overall impact of what good education does for Guilford County. And that's economic development, that's attracting new residents, and making our county continue to grow. So yes, there's no guarantee. However, the county commissioners and Board of Education have all staked themselves out on the public record, and so they would have to answer to you, the voters, if they change how they use the money.
Patrice, how crowded are classrooms, and how will this money help that problem?
First, I just want to say, give you guys a little bit of information about Page to help you see the challenges that we're facing. We're proud to say we're now the largest school in our district with 2,100 students. We have about 40% white, 40% black, and everything else mixed in our school. We're also about half and half, those kids who are middle class and those kids who are on free and reduced lunch. So that's Page High School. Now, overcrowding the classrooms, right now we're sitting some classrooms with 36 to 37 students. Okay? And when I have to tell my teachers, there's nothing I can do, it makes me think, am I truly in America, in a state that really values education? And I know I am. But let me tell you what overcrowded classroom does. When you have an overcrowded classroom, you're talking about the limited amount of time, the individual time that students can get. We all know that individual feedback, the time that they can get one-on-one, the personalized learning, that is the key to growing them. With the more kids you're putting in the classrooms, the less you can do this. You're also talking about resource availability. We actually participated in a contest last year to get Page High School some more computers. Because we have like 3 computer labs with 2,100 students. So you can imagine our kids don't have access to computer labs like they should. So we participated in a contest to get more computers. We don't have enough on that lab to go into these classrooms that are 36 and 37. Their voice is just being heard. You know, students need to be able to talk and feel like they're a part. And we work really hard on that, but it's always difficult when the classrooms are overcrowded. And the biggest thing, besides the learning, is the morale of my teachers. How do you keep a person's spirit up when things continue to say to them, we value you less? I mean, how do I do that? How do I say, you are valued in this community? When I continue to increase your class size, and for my experienced teacher, your pay is going nowhere. The pay cut you heard about is not going to the majority of my teachers in my building. You have certain pieces, certain pockets of teachers who get pay cuts. So what that does is, that kills morale. You got a big pay cut, and maybe I got $100, or maybe I got nothing. Because I've been teaching longer, so that's what you value for my experience. So there's so many things that we need. You know, the superintendent talks about the graduation coach. For the first time in Page's history, we've received a 90% graduation rate. Remember our population, remember our size, and those who we serve. We had a graduation coach. The district had to take away our graduation coaches. So, you know, when people say, what will we use the money for? I say, come visit us. Come see us. You know, it's this commercial out there, and we joke about it at Page. It's some lady who says she was a teacher and how great things are. And the joke we have is, what school does she work in? And did she work in a school the last 20 years? Because it's unreal. If you're in education and you hear those commercials, it is unreal. All you have to do is go to any high school. You don't have to go to Page, you go to elementary school. That is not the reality we're living in. This is not a place that teachers feel like they are valued. When we're losing teachers to Texas, Virginia, things like that, because of the morale, that is not fair to our students, and it's not fair to me. And I say that because I am tasked with putting the best teacher in front of them, and I continually get my hands tied that I can't do this. How do I compete when I come to an experienced teacher and I cannot pay them what they're worth for their knowledge? I can't even tell them they're going to have a decent classroom size. We're not even talking about textbooks, because we all know there's no textbooks and they're outdated. But I can't even say in a math class, you're going to have a calculator for every child. So I don't even, it amazes me that anybody could be against it. And I know you hear the passion in my voice, because it truly amazes me. So you're saying from $3.99, which I think that Whopper thing combo is, to $4, it's not worth for our students. This is our future. And I'll close by saying, my son told me this morning on the way to work, we ride together when his car is on, when he's on punishment. Anyway, so he's telling me about how he wants to live in California. And he says the beaches, and he says all these different things, and I keep coming back at him. And he says, well, they care about the schools more. The schools are better there. And I, I'm trying to think of some things, and I'm like, we're getting there. We've got the sales tax coming. But when my 16-year-old son feels that way, we've got a problem. Thank you.
Speaking of teachers and teacher salary, Talk on TV suggests that the state increased education funding, which gave teachers raises. Is this true? And if so, why is this tax increase necessary?
Yes, the state did in fact give teachers in general a raise for the 14-15 year. But you've already heard Ms. Faison talk about the fact that that raise did not go to every teacher, and certainly didn't go in an equal amount. And so there's that issue that certainly must be addressed. You can see and hear how it impacts morale in the school system across the state. But there was an increase, and so the question then is, why would we need additional funding? Well, it's pretty clear as you listen to Ms. Faison that the funding definitely does not cover all of the needs of our school district. In fact, the increase that occurred for teachers this year and the increase in state funding that occurred for the 14-15 year still does not bring us back on a per pupil basis to what it was even in 2008. Still well short of that number. In addition to that, the increase that occurred is with salary, and then there were certainly increases that dealt with health insurance and even retirement rate. Well, those things then, where you have those increases there, means that overall, then there has to be cuts somewhere else. Let me talk about it at a local level because it may make a little bit more sense here. That increase at the state level for teacher salaries also meant that there needed to be increases provided to locally paid teachers and other staff as well. For Guilford County Schools, that added up to be about $4.6 million. You tack on top of that the increase in the retirement rate, increase in health insurance, increase in growth, particularly for charter schools this year. Another $2.3 million in what I call sort of sustaining operations. So 4.6 plus 2.3, you're now over 7 million, almost $7 million. The county commission gave us an increase of about $2.3 million. So in the same way the state can talk about having given an increase, and the county can talk about having given an increase, and that did happen. You can see then that we're still $5 million that we have to find funding for. We have to, because we must pay for those insurance increases and the retirement rate and the salary increases for those employees, because we must match what the state does for locally paid teachers. And so that ultimately means that there are things that we must cut back. And so even in this year, then, we had to make cuts with regards to things like graduation coaches, things like certainly out of central office, reducing the number of instructional coaches that would serve and support our teachers in our schools. Things like raising class size yet again in our schools. We have to do those sorts of things to make up the difference. So sure, we can talk about an increase, but it's an incomplete story when you do so. And I think it's important that the rest of that story be included when we talk about the slight increases that occurred at the state level and even at the local.
Jennifer, as a parent and advocate, is it true that many of our schools do not have textbooks?
That is absolutely true. And I can tell you from personal experience, my daughter, oldest daughter, she's in 7th grade. And, I took math, I took advanced math, but it's been a few years now. And so when she asks me questions about how to do this math problem, what she shows me is a worksheet, and it's got the problems on it. And it has 0 instruction. I remember in the Stone Ages bringing home a textbook, and you had the chapter. And if I had a question, my parents would sit and look through the chapter and look at the examples, and they'd figure it out, and then we talked through it. And that's how you saw help. But now, based upon that, then, we're having to phone a friend. We're having to look it up online and try and figure these things out ourselves. So math textbooks is something that I feel a severe hinder in. Science, social studies, these things aren't up to date. I think she had maybe a science textbook, was the only one she had last year. But social studies, they're not. What the teachers are doing, these already overtaxed, overwhelmed teachers, underpaid, are having to go out and recreate the wheel. And, science and social studies changed. And so each year, they're having to go out and find these resources. And what my daughter has this year are 3 ring binders. And it's printed off material. So let's think about the trees we're killing, too. It's printed off material that she's putting in, and she's reading through and highlighting various things that these teachers have done a wonderful job of supplementing these lack of resources. But just think about how much teacher time, how much supplies we could save if we could give the kids textbooks. And we're doing great initiatives, but they're not things that are coming from our own funding. They're special grants that the district is wonderful enough to go out and seek funding for with these tablets for middle schools. We can't wait till we get ours in a couple of weeks. But that's middle schools. It's not everybody. And so until we can have either the digital technology in hand, then we need to be providing a basic principle of education is your textbook.
Thank you, Jennifer. Back to you, Patrice. As you as a principal, is it your understanding that principals will get to decide how to spend this money, or will it be the district administration?
And I have to say, on Jennifer's comment that our joke is we have our books in the room now, social studies, and there's never been a black president. In case you thought it was, I'm letting you know, according to the textbooks that we have. Anyway, I think it's going to be a combination of both, if I'm honest. I think the district is going to take a significant amount, I would hope the district will take a significant amount and repair some of the needs that we have. I know just Page High School, we have a tremendous amount of needs for our school. So I would assume that I would start seeing my maintenance people on a regular basis trying to just patch things up. So I'm hoping that's going to happen. I also, from what I've heard, what I've seen of our district, and if they continue to do business the way they normally do, I would feel that they would give some money back to us based on how many students we're serving, things of that nature, so we can best serve the students in our building. So I feel very comfortable how the money will be spent, because both ways we're winning. When they give us some money to dictate how we're spending the money in our building, and when they make the repairs that our facilities so greatly need.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Winston, we are here as young professional groups hosting this panel discussion today. Why is this important to young professionals, and how does the state of public education impact our community and our local economy?
I think a lot of the conversation historically around the value of public education talks about it's this cornerstone of our democracy, and it creates civil society. And these are things I don't want to dismiss or underplay, certainly in a place that really focuses on the law and on civil society. And yet what we know actually from research about how we engage people in the conversation around public education and move their support is that this is personal. People make very personal decisions about education for their families and for their children. And we need to talk about this in real personal ways because it is personal. We don't have to shy away from that. So one of the things I want to say is choice is important to families. To find, as a parent of 2 students, it's important to be able to find a place that's right for your child and for your family. And so we want Guilford County Public Schools to be a strong, solid choice and to have a lot of choices, which we are really fortunate in our district to have a lot of innovation and a lot of choice available to families. We want to continue to provide that as families are evaluating the choices that are right fit for their child and their family in this fast-changing world in which we live. And there are also some really hard and fast ways that it matters to everybody, whether you have kids going to school, whether you're ever going to have kids going to school. So one is property values. There's almost nothing that correlates more strongly to the value of personal property, the value of your home, than the quality of public education. It matters by neighborhood and it matters across the community. So if we want to increase the wealth of our community, we need to invest in our public schools. There's a direct tie. I suspect everyone in this room owns a house or hopes to, plans to one day, and it will be directly tied to the value of our public schools. Number 2, the security and safety of neighborhoods in our community directly relates to our public schools. There are schoolhouses across our community. How well those buildings are maintained, how they're perceived is really important. How they serve as a hub in a neighborhood and a community, the experience that children and families have inside those buildings directly relates to neighborhood cohesion and security, and that spreads across our neighborhood. This also impacts our broad standard of living and our property values. And it does for everyone across the community. And the third piece is that over 85% of the school-age kids in our community attend public school. And that statistic has remained fairly consistent. We're not losing kids to private school. There are families making that choice for a variety of really good reasons for their family. 85% of the children. So the people that this community relies on, their kids are in public school, and they came from public schools. So when I walk into, Moses Cone Hospital to have surgery on my wrist, yes, there's a chance that my surgeon went to public school, but I'm not really into these sort of rags to riches stories. The surgeon may have gone to public school. What I do know is that 90+% of the folks that I intersect in that environment went to public school and or their kids are in public school. So police officers, firefighters, nurses, engineers, computer programmers, lawyers, paralegals, customer service reps, the lifeblood of our community, who we all rely on, are tied into our public school system. And so when we invest there, it impacts our experience, because when families know their children are getting a good education and that they're safe and that they're thriving and they have a future, they perform better at work. They show up more at work. So there are really personal reasons for each and every one of you to care about this and to convince other people to care about it enough so that they show up and vote for it. And I hope you'll remember those 3 really personal reasons, in addition to those broader, loftier goals we have to continue to support our democracy and build civil society. But the bottom line is that doesn't move people to vote. It doesn't move people to pull the lever. And it's the personal reasons that do, and they are really compelling, so we shouldn't sweep them under the rug.
Thank you. I have a few additional questions that are not on your sheets. So I
Let's take a pop quiz. Yeah.
Mr. Green, the revenue from the lottery is allotted for education. Why is the 4% tax needed in regards to the lottery?
So the lottery says the education lottery. There are a couple of different components to the education lottery. The most significant for us to pay attention to would be those funds that are allotted for construction. Those funds, which for Guilford County is about $4.8 million. actually comes to Guilford County, the commission, and they have decided to use that money for debt service. So it isn't as though that those funds are then coming to us for us to then be able to use for repairs and maintenance. They're being used for debt service. The other significant part of the lottery that I think is worth lifting up would be funds that would go into the general fund at the state level. And those funds then most would think would be sort of in addition to existing funds. But unfortunately, as I've already talked about, on a per pupil basis, how we've been having less and less funds. Those funds are not being used to really supplement, but rather are just supplanting funds that otherwise would be in the general fund. And so there is a significant need then for us to have, I believe, at the first level, to have additional funds at the state level. And so while the conversation is here talking about what needs to happen at the local level, it's certainly important for us to not forget that we need to have conversations at the state level. The state makes up about 60% of our operating budget, so real conversation is necessary there as well. But then certainly at the local level, as we're finding dwindling resources on a per pupil basis, there's certainly a need, I believe, for the quarter-cent sales tax, notwithstanding the lottery.
Thank you. One thing I learned the other day, I'm not a big lottery player, is also, all lottery dollars are not the education lottery. So, like, Powerball is an education lottery. It's like the Cash 5, or somebody the other day was breaking it down for me. So not all lottery tickets that are sold are in that category of the education lottery. So sometimes the perceptions of the pool of that money is greater than the reality of the portion of it that's actually designated as part of the North Carolina education lottery.
Thank you. Jennifer, what assurance do we have that the quarter-cent sales tax is sustainable for our schools?
As far as moving forward year after year, well, I think it's sustainable because we're not jumping. We're talking about a quarter cent. So we're not jumping by dollars and leaps and bounds. We're talking about a small increase. It's a penny on a $4 purchase. And so the tax is something that will hopefully be less onerous. It's not on necessity. And so providing that small of a punch on an individual purchase, but providing $12 to $14 million in funding to the schools is something that will certainly make a difference. It's going to make a difference at Page High School. It's going to make a difference in a classroom, and it's going to make a difference on an individual level. And so I think this is something that we certainly can carry forward. I think we do need to look for other opportunities to increase local and state funding, as Mo's already talked about. But I think state taxes, sales taxes is something that we can continue to use to fund education. We are not jumping ahead of any of the other counties around us. The norm is about 7%, so we would be in line with the rest of the counties in the state.
I'm going to open this question up to the entire panel, whoever would like to answer it. How do you feel the monies will be dispersed through the schools? Within each school, books, supplies, activities, teachers' raises. We've talked about various things, salaries, technology, textbooks, graduation coaches. How do you feel and see the money being dispersed?
Yeah, I don't know if I should perhaps take that question. Because the Board of Education, as I indicated earlier, has decided that 60% of the funds would go towards classrooms and teacher supports, and 40% would go to repairs and maintenance. The Board of Education hasn't gone further and said, okay, of the 60%, 10% is going for compensation increases, 10% is going for instructional supplies, until they've not gone that far. And so I think it would be a little bit unfair for us to sort of say, well, this is exactly how it's going. I don't want to have any misinformation be put out there. I do think that the Board of Education, though, will look to see what, so a couple of things. One, I have the first opportunity, if you will, statutorily, to put forward a recommended budget to the Board of Education. And so, as part of my recommendation, I'll obviously be looking to see what funds are coming in at the state level, what's the projections there, what other things might be impacting us, and then we'll try to make a recommendation as to where I think those funds should be going. And I certainly will be right in line with, without giving percentages, that the Board of Education has hit it right on the head. We need to be looking inside that classroom. We need to be figuring out ways to lower class size, to get more teachers in classroom. We need to be looking at instructional supplies and materials. We need to figure out additional ways to provide additional compensation to teachers, to recruit, to retain, and to reward teachers for excellent performance as well. And so those would be the sorts of things that I will be looking at as I'm trying to make decisions and making recommendations about where that 60% will go. But I don't think that we can really say for certainty at this point because ultimately the Board of Education will make that decision.
I hope folks understand, and I want to speak as a community. In the year and a half I've been in this job, I've learned a lot about the public education system and the culture. And one thing that I think is really extraordinary is that that's not just a political answer that says, I don't know what's going to happen. Our Board of Education and our leadership have not shied away from this. They don't know what funding they're going to get from the state next year, and are already working on building a budget when they don't know what's going to happen from the state legislature, and already have said this $14 million will be spent this way. That's a brave and bold thing to do when they have no idea what other funding cuts or requirements may come down from the state or even the county. So I do hope that there's an appreciation for what it takes for them to be working in such an unknown scenario to try and do the very most that they can to give the community the confidence that those dollars will be spent where they're most needed and where they most impact students. It's a tough environment to do that.
Thank you. So we all seem to be in favor.
Should we have a show of hands?
But I would like to hear from each of you if you see any negative side of voting yes on November 4th.
As I said, I don't understand. I truly, I really want to talk to someone who does see a negative side so I can just hear, because I truly don't understand why you wouldn't go from $3.99 to $4 to help education. So I'm clueless with why you wouldn't. I mean, maybe I'm missing something, but I don't get it. I don't.
Winston?
I hope that we obviously are living in an atmosphere of distrust and disgruntlement with government, period, and maybe even large institutions, period. And I think that can poison conversation, rational conversation, and it can be a kind of red herring and an easy way for folks to dismiss things in their very busy and complicated lives. And I hope that that doesn't overshadow that this does make sense. This is a solid, good broker deal between officials who are trying to do a good job and are putting up some extraordinary numbers in our schools. Our school district has been no excuses. We have kids who are poorer than they were 10 years ago. We have fewer resources. That doesn't mean we shouldn't be graduating more, sending more to college, having more take AP exams. So I just hope that that kind of general atmosphere in which we all are living and operating and being drawn into doesn't overshadow the positives of this. I think that's some of the fear I have, that we want to try to overcome in conversations like this.
Jennifer?
I'm with Patrice. I absolutely see no reason why this isn't a good solution to fund our schools. The only response that I've heard is just somebody who's no new taxes. Well, number one, you live in America and you have a civic duty to help pay for this organization, for this county, for government to run. And the same people who say, well, I don't want a new tax, but let's have the city council talk about how we're going to cut garbage collection or loose leaf service. And do you remember the flood of people that came down to protest? Oh, you're going to pick up my loose leaf service. I need that. And so it's the same thing. I mean, we have to provide services to our citizens. And I would dare somebody to argue with me that educating these children is not just as important as picking up your loose leaves on the curb. So if you want to have a strong community and have a community of children ready to move forward and lead this community further down the road into its future, you have to adequately educate them. So there's no reason that this should not happen.
Ms. Green, before we open it up to the audience for questions, would you like me to have any final comments?
On that last question?
Sure.
Yeah, certainly I've heard the concern that no additional taxes, no new taxes. And something that certainly we ought to listen to. But as I've certainly been in our community now for 6 years, at some point we have to have additional resources to do the sorts of things we want to do for our young people. Particularly where we're not even sort of back to where we were 6 years ago. When I first arrived here, I actually arrived right at the time that the recession hit. And I said to our community, and certainly to our Board of Education, we will make it work. We do not, I didn't even ask for one additional penny from the county commission. We will make it work. We all understand the difficult situation we find ourselves in. We will make it work. We'll redirect resources. We'll find resources from other places. That can't be true forever. It cannot be true forever. And indeed, it's to a place where now, instead of me talking about educating children, I have to start the conversation with, I need additional resources. That's not the way that I believe our educators ought to be beginning a conversation with regards to education. And so I understand that concern. I truly do. But I believe we reached a place, and particularly as Alan Duncan again put it in some even national context, we're scraping the bottom. That cannot be what we want for North Carolina with regards to the way we fund our school system, the way we pay our teachers. It cannot be the way we want it. And so certainly hear those concerns, listen to those concerns, try to make adjustments in the way that we budget resources within our school district, such that we're not utilizing resources in an inappropriate way. But at some point, we need additional resources.
Thank you. We will now open up the floor to the audience to ask any of our panelists questions. Anyone have any questions? Yes, ma'am.
How much the wording that's going on the ballot decided? Why does it not say anything about education on the ballot?
So the ballot itself comes from legislation and is utilized then across the state in exactly the same way. I believe it's intended to be that way such that county commissioners can have the flexibility to make a decision as to where those resources will be used in the future. And so it's a very straightforward thing, I think, on that one. But yeah, our county commission at the time that it voted to put it on the ballot was very clear that it wanted those funds to be used for public school funding. So that's what's then giving us sort of the ability to say, okay, that's where then these funds will be used. But it's statutorily set. And so any increase anywhere across the state would have the exact same language.
Thank you for your question. Yes, ma'am.
In the event that this quarter cent tax happens, you say that 40% is going to go to repairs and maintenance of the buildings. And purely looking at numbers, those are big money items, maintaining the buildings. And have you made every effort to come up with a plan for the deferred maintenance and catching up on the backlog of maintenance? And also, if we don't maintain these buildings, doesn't matter how many textbooks you have, you won't have a facility for the students.
Absolutely. So to answer your first question, is there a deferred maintenance plan? There are certainly things that we would want to do. We reached a point where we're down to $2 million per year, where you almost say, what's the use of having a plan? Because you can't have a plan when you're down to 16 cents a square foot. Any plan that you have really is is a useless thing. Even with the resources that we'll get, even 40% will begin to just make a little bit of a dent on the repairs and maintenance. We have in our community, so the thing that I think is important here is this. We have probably $1 billion worth of facility needs. And so this incremental increase in repairs and maintenance won't cover that $1 billion in needs in our facilities. And so where the big dollars will have to come from will be with our community having conversations about additional bond to actually then do the major repair work or replacement work of building of new facilities and renovation of facilities, existing facilities. We will have a plan that we will share with the Board of Education. Okay, if we get now close to $7 million in repairs and maintenance dollars, here's how we would propose to use it. But we're again just scraping sort of a few things off of multiple millions of dollars of needs. You're exactly right. You can't have schools if you don't have some level of facilities. And so it's a constant sort of balance in that as to where you put the resources. And so our Board of Education has said, yeah, and I think it's a great balance to say, well, we've got to do significant work in our classrooms to support our teachers. And so let's balance it. Let's bring both up slightly and try to hold on to that balance in the meantime. So, not to say that there's any right or wrong answer, but this is a good balance, I believe, between trying to maintain our facilities while also recognizing that we need to support our teachers.
Yes, in the back.
You mentioned teacher assistants earlier. Guilford County has traditionally been known as a leader in the state in the AU community for its AU programs. And there's been concern recently about maybe cuts and reductions made to those programs. I've seen firsthand, I've got a 3-year-old in the AU preschool program at Sternberger, and I've seen how a teacher and teacher assistant have worked in hand and created miracles. As the AU community is growing, obviously, as the prevalence rate gets higher and higher each year, the system's going to be taxed more. Is there a commitment, if some of this money comes through, to direct it towards maintaining Guilford County's position as a leader in AU programs in the state?
Yeah, so as I indicated earlier, there's certainly a commitment that the dollars would be placed back in our schools and in our classrooms. At this point, I don't want to go further in saying, well, it's going to be for AU classes versus other types of classrooms at this point, because we're not at a place where we can make that decision. We don't know what's coming from the state. We don't know what other resources might be available elsewhere. There is still a very, very strong commitment, however, to serving every child as best we can with the resources that we get. And so we're going to continue to try to impress upon both the state and the county that we need additional resources, particularly for populations that are increasing. An AU population, autism population is certainly increasing in our community. So that's a place where we know we've got to encourage others to recognize that additional resources need to go. But I'm not going to commit to you that 8% or 20%, or I'm just not able to do that at this point.
Yes, here.
Right. I think it's a fair comparison to make that we are basically shareholders investing in your company, and your value-added product is the education of our children, which is hugely valuable to future society as far as social progression and community well-being, among many other things. But for that investment, I'd like to know what our expected future earnings are. If you got the $14 million per year increase, how many more kids are going to graduate? And not only that in today's society, but go on to college. How many more than would not if we did not do this?
Sure. I think it's a great question. And I like the way that you think in posing the question. Yeah, so I wish I could tell you exactly, if you give me $1 more, it's going to result in one more student graduating from high school. It doesn't become as easy as that. Children are not widgets. And so we have to think about it, recognizing that our young people are, in fact, they're people. But I can tell you this, what we've been able to do with less has been nothing short of remarkable. When you consider in 2008, we had a graduation rate of 79.5%. And even as we've had decreases in our per pupil funding, we've been able to raise that rate up to 88.5%. So even with less money, we know that we can do more and more. But unfortunately, we're reaching a place where some of the very things that allowed us to have those increased rates, we're now having to scrape away. The graduation coach is an example of one example I brought up earlier, and let me just explain what that's relating to. Graduation coaches are those individuals that are working with those young people who are deciding, maybe I don't want to graduate from high school. Maybe there's something else I need to do or want to do. This isn't important. Really saying, no, we're going to figure out a way to get you from here to home base. If we need to be out at your house to come see you, if we need to work on your schedule to figure out a different schedule that'll work for you, to your benefit. If we need to be with you to be sure that you're getting the tutoring services that are necessary for you to graduate. Those are the sorts of things then that translate into more and more kids that are graduating that now we're having to take away. So being able to put that back in, if we're able to do that, I'm not saying that that's where we'll put the first dollar back, but if we were able to put that first dollar back there, then I think you would see continued increases in our graduation. I would also say then that if you look, you ask about college going and having more of our students going on to college. I will tell you that I believe that additional resources being flowing into our schools, given how we've been able to use our resources, I believe as effectively as we have up to this point, would suggest to me and to you that more and more of our young people can go to college. Again, if you look at the couple of metrics that we pay attention to, one would be the number of students who are taking and passing at least one advanced placement course before they leave high school, which gives them the opportunity to, if they do well on those courses, pass them, if you will, get college credit. We are at 37% of our graduating class meeting that mark. Last year's class was at 32%. The nation in the class of 2013, the state was at about 19%. The nation was at 20.1%. So again, if you put more dollars with us, we know how to utilize those dollars effectively. We need more dollars. It becomes that sort of real to me. Now, there are places where we need, let me give you an example where I suggest to you in the classrooms and even outside the classroom. Our literacy scores are nowhere near where we expect them to be. But we've had to cut back on literacy coaches that serve our students. Those were individuals that were making a difference for our teachers who are already overwhelmed to be able to come in and support our teachers. And so that wouldn't be a place where these dollars would go because they're not in the classroom. But lowering the class size would allow those teachers to have more opportunity to work with individual students such that they're getting to a place where they can then, when they get to high school, take advanced placement courses such that they can get a place where they can graduate and then go on to college. I believe we would deliver on additional dollars that you invest in our students.
Can I get two more metrics on that one? When I came on the board in 2000, the total scholarship amount to our students was $28 million. This past year was $150 million. That's real money. It's going back into the community, assisting the families of the community, many who desperately need that assistance in order for their children to have the dream of going to college. Another metric that's a much newer metric, and therefore we got much less of a track record to show with you. As many of you know, all high school juniors are required to take the ACT test now in North Carolina, so you get 100% sampling of ACT test scores. Under the university system, there's a certain score that you achieve in order to be eligible to go to our state, to an institution within our state university system. And our percentage, the first year, we raised on that percentage. I won't get exactly, but approximately 2%.
Yes, sir.
In the first year, we're very focused on continuing to raise that. It went up to, I believe, 58% this year.
That's correct. Over 58%.
So it's very important to us that we raise that percentage. That's a metric that we focus on and are looking at. And keeping in mind, those are just juniors. Our percentage is actually higher this semester that their senior year and increased their scores as you would expect. Just looking at that junior cohort, that's an important metric for us that we're also looking at, because rightfully some people are very interested in metrics, and that can help. But if you ever look at metrics on ACT scores or others, we have a lot more detailed information. Don't compare us just to the state without knowing what the subgroups look like in our district compared to the subgroups of the state. That would take me longer to say, and I'm glad to talk to you afterwards about it. But the gist of it is our subgroups are scoring higher than the subgroups of the state. Our demographics are just different from the state, which we're proud to have.
And I just got a big picture comment, is I know that you're talking about empirical data, but another thing that you need to look at as the benefit of passing the sales tax is what you would typically call something as goodwill and what it does for our community. And it shows, there's two ways that I think our community as a whole would garner goodwill from approving the sales tax. And number one, it would show our corporate citizens that our community individually, we're invested and that we want to fund our schools. Because a large way that the school makes up for some of the lack of funding and the way that we're able to provide incentive things like cars for service learning is by seeking corporate sponsorships for that. And so how can we continue to go to these corporations and ask for funds if we're not willing to fund it for our own kids? So that's one. And number two is everybody wants the next big Honda jet, the next big economic development. Okay, well, before any corporation looks at moving their high-level executives, their corporations here, they're going to look at the status of our schools. They're going to look to see if we have good schools, to see if we care about our schools, and if we're improving our schools. And so you're not going to have the next BF or whatever corporation is that we're after unless you show that we are vested.
Thank you. Yes, sir. Finally get to your question.
It's been mentioned about distrust of politicians. I think they have mentioned that. And it's also mentioned that the county commission has said in good faith that they will allocate these funds toward education. Well, these funds, I think most of us know that these funds will go in the general fund, and it's up to them on a yearly basis to decide how they allocate that money. We also know that county commission, there's a turnover of roughly half of them every 2 years. So, well, there's a potential of turnover of almost half of them every 2 years. So even though you have good faith now, who's to say that after this election or after the election 2 years from now, 2 years from then, that they will still have that same good faith, especially when we sit in a county that's roughly $1 billion in debt. So that's kind of question number one. Question number two, we had Making Connections Around the Table, a synerG event that was put on earlier this year. Ray Trapp was one of the speakers. And Commissioner Trapp mentioned how the school board had gone to the commissioners, I don't know how many years ago it was, apparently not too long, and said, we need more money or else we're going to have to lay off teachers' assistants. Well, in his words, the school board got more money and they still laid off teachers' assistants. So how do we know we have good faith from the school board as well?
I've been starting, I'm
You want me
happy.
to take
No, I'm
one, you
glad
take
you-
two?
Yeah.
I'm a school board, so I'm glad you when we went there, we said we were in a very underfunded place, and we had a number of things that we were going to have to choose from about what we were going to have to cut. County commissioners showed the greatest interest in teacher assistants. We had to have a broader perspective, knowing all the issues, all the cuts we had. We reduced the number of cuts to teacher assistants that year from what we had before. We also have reduced twice. We've had plans to reduce the number of days for teacher assistants, for teacher work days, so that we could hire more by having them take some days where they weren't getting paid. That's very impactful on those folks who are not getting paid for those days. And so we worked very hard to avoid doing that. So yes, we did reduce some, but we also had to reduce a whole lot of other things that we said were, from our standpoint, every bit as important. So there was no, that was what the county commissioners happened to be that particular year the most interested in. But we never said that that was the only thing. They knew we had a list of things that were very important. That was one of them. And through their help, then it was the first year we actually got a little bit incremental addition additional money. We were able to reduce the cuts there a little bit, but we had other things that we had to take care of as well. It's never that easy.
Gentlemen,
Yeah.
And you mentioned that all the lottery funds are not earmarked for education. You know, people play lottery, because I think that's kind of where the, you know, people that are not dialed into how the monies are being spent, because they don't know. Only thing they know is that the lottery money is being earmarked for education, education lottery. That's what they hear. But the people I talk to various groups of people that are college graduates and people that are high school dropouts. And they're thinking the same thing, believe it or not. And I'm wondering, how can that message get out there? That that all the money that's raised is not going to education. And another thing I want to say, and I noticed this in a lot of meetings that I've been to, where are the legislators from Raleigh? Because 60% of the budget comes from the General Assembly. And it seems like the legislators that are here, this is not, our politics have gotten so partisan that if they see you here, they say, well, I can't really, I can't be seen here, because how's that gonna look at my little group over here? Because at the end of the day, our kids, whether they're Democrats, whether parents are Democrats, Republicans, Independents, they're being educated right here. So I don't get it. I mean, I sit and listen, I don't get it. And really, it really needs to be put on blast. Where are you? Because you say you about education, where are you? You can't be that busy, because a lot of these campaign speeches, I'm for education, I want to do everything, and yet we're at the bottom. We're at the bottom of the country in terms of providing funds for teachers and other things, schools. At the end of the day, we've got to do something different. This is not working. And I would advise anybody that if you see you want the legislature, find out what are their positions. Because see, what's happening now is private charter schools is trying to take off. And it seems like there's a whole bunch of folks looking at private schools saying, well, I'm going to take my kid out of public schools and put them in private schools. That seems to be the soup of the day. So that's all I'm going to say. But I just had to get that out because it's serious.
The largest growth is around charter schools, which play an important, innovative role in our community and offer important choice. When the comparison to public schools is made, though, charter schools don't have to accept anybody. So charter schools can put very strict requirements on the types of students that they accept. And Guilford County Public Schools accepts all students and commits to take all of those students to their highest potential, which takes different kind of interventions and a diverse array of services. Charter schools do not have that obligation at all. An innovator, laboratory for what works. It's not an apples to apples comparison to say, well, we don't need large public schools. What we need are lots of charter schools. So I think that's an important piece when we talk about that growth there, that it's worth noting.
one more question, yes ma'am.
I think I might be the oldest person in this room, I'm not sure, but I have two children that are productive members of society who both attended Page High School.
Okay. Okay, no worries.
Oh, yeah.
Is there one right here? The game is next week.
I'm also a real estate agent here in Greensboro. I won't say which company, so it won't sound like I'm self-promoting, but I want to say something. I have listened to this conversation. I don't have children in school in Guilford County, but I have had. I was born in Greensboro, didn't grow up here, but I was born here, and I love this city, and I love this state. And I know for a fact that when I am working with a client from outside of Greensboro or outside of the state, number one question they are interested in when they're getting ready to buy a house, schools. What kind of schools are in that area? And to what you said, Jennifer, you better believe corporations are looking at the statistics on our schools here. I have heard so many agents, we've had so many discussions about this and have just said the bottom line is fix the schools and they will come. And we can talk all day about the negatives or who's going to decide where the money's going to go, but the bottom line is we are in a crisis situation and we need to do something about our schools. And we are the ones who can do something, the voting public.
Thank you.
I'll be the amen.
Yeah. Does anyone on the panel have any closing remarks?
I just want to say something when you said something about, how do we know it's going to go to where they're going to, they say it's going to go and have a change occur. I kind of relate that to as you give money to an organization or, you support someone you think out of charity. You intend for it to go there and we intend for it to go. And I think we can trust our politicians when we hold them accountable. But voting public, that's our intention. And we should vote that way. And then we should hold them accountable for what we've been told.
Right.
Amen. Oh, amen.
Any other closing remarks? Greensboro and synerG. We thank you all for being here. We thank our 4 fabulous panelists and all your knowledge. Thank you, Mr. Duncan, as well for being here and jumping in when we need to. Go forth and have a great afternoon.
Thank you.